They came with silence, not with violence, not yet. But the real war always starts with paper, and by the time you hear the boots, it's already too late. Somewhere in rural Texas, beneath a pale blue sky, scorched by decades of sun, a worn American flag fluttered atop a rusted pole beside a sagging porch. That porch belonged to a forgotten man in a forgotten town, a place the maps barely named, where the wind whispered memories across the plains, and no one listened anymore. Inside that crooked house, Raymond Cole sat alone. He was still, not in peace, but because his legs had long since given up. Paralyzed from the waist down since Afghanistan, Ray had learned to live on terms that were never really his. The VA had done what it could. Then the checks shrank. Then the caseworkers stopped calling. And then, quiet, hold on a moment before we move forward. Let us know where in the world you're watching from. And if you're loving these stories, don't forget to hit subscribe. Tomorrow's episode is going to be absolutely mind-blowing. His hands, broad and calloused, maneuvered his wheelchair with practiced rhythm through the narrow halls of a house he'd adapted himself. The once proud home had been restructured with makeshift rails, widened doorways, and a ramp that sagged slightly more each year. But it worked. It was all his. And more than that, it was safety. That morning, like all others, began with instant coffee and the soft creak of wood warmed by the rising sun. He wheeled out onto the porch, glanced down the long gravel drive, and took in the vast emptiness before him. Acres of dying brush, a mailbox dangling by one rusted screw, and silence. Then came the letter. The postman didn't linger. He never did. Just a flash of the red truck, a mechanical clang, and the slow retreat of tire over gravel. Ray rolled down the ramp and reached the mailbox with more effort than he'd admit. The envelope was thicker than usual, government seal. His name, Raymond E. Cole, typed in cold black ink. He tore it open, and the world stopped. It was an eviction notice. Official, final and unforgiving. The land his house sat on, his, was now part of a county-wide redevelopment plan. A program pushed by some new bureaucrat with city dreams and dead eyes. And it was signed by a man Ray had never met, County Commissioner Nathan Crowley. 30 days to leave. No appeals, no compensation, just gone. Ray's fingers trembled as he held the notice. Not from fear, not from weakness, but from something else, something buried deeper than rage. A quiet, cold refusal. He looked around his porch. The wind moved through the fields like ghosts passing by. This place wasn't just shelter. It was memory. It was the only part of him that hadn't been taken, and now they wanted that too. Inside, he sat the letter down on the chipped kitchen table and stared at it for a long time. The shadows moved across the linoleum floor as the sun shifted west. He didn't speak. He didn't curse. He just sat. Then he reached for the phone. Not for a lawyer, not for the VA, but for something else, something older. He opened an old metal box. Inside, pictures of soldiers long buried, a folded flag, and one contact card, brittle and yellowed, with a handwritten number, Darrell Trent, 1st Battalion Ret. His thumb hovered over the digits. He didn't press them, not yet. Instead, he wheeled to the front door, looked out again across the empty Texas land and whispered, barely audible, "They think I'll just roll away." Ray's eyes narrowed, not with anger, but with the certainty of a man who had nothing left to lose, and that was their mistake. They thought the war was over for Raymond Cole, but the letter didn't end something. It started it. The morning came, without promise. Gray clouds hovered over the Texas plain, the kind that didn't bring rain, only weight. Raymond Cole sat in his chair near the window, watching the gravel road like a soldier waiting on a hostile perimeter. He hadn't slept. Not really. Sleep, for him, was a place of too many memories, ones with sand, fire, and silence that followed explosions. At 9:12 a.m., a dust trail curled up the road. A county-issued white sedan pulled into his drive, its tires crunching over old earth. Ray recognized the type instantly. Clean car, city tag, and a driver in pressed khakis who looked like he hadn't spent one honest day sweating. The man stepped out holding a clipboard. People who once stood against Ray were now helping others stand on their own. "You ever think it would end like this?" Tessa asked. "I didn't think it'd end at all," Ray said. "I figured one day they'd push too hard and I'd fade into the background like so many others. But you didn't," she said softly. "You stood up." He nodded, then looked down at Rook. "No," he said. "We did." They sat in silence again, watching the children play, the flag ripple, and the wind carry dust and memory through the grass. When Tessa eventually stood to head inside, Ray stayed. He wanted one more moment. The wind shifted, and Ray breathed deep, the scent of wildflowers and tilled earth filling his lungs. He thought of all he'd lost. The years, the friends, the quiet aching in his bones that no medal could ever heal. But he also thought of what he'd gained, a family, a purpose, a voice that refused to go unheard. Rook lifted his head again and let out a single low bark, not out of alarm, but acknowledgement. Ray followed his gaze to the field. The children had started training drills, nothing complicated, just playful exercises meant to mimic search and rescue. One girl stepped forward, calling for her canine partner. A golden retriever trotted to her side. Ray smiled. He reached down and scratched behind Rook's ears one last time that morning. His fingers slow and deliberate. "We did good, boy," he said. Rook blinked, rested his head on Ray's foot, and stayed there. And as the sun rose higher, casting long shadows across the land they'd protected, not with bullets or orders, but with presence, Ray let his eyes close. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel like a veteran. He felt like home. The porch light was already on. A small group had left flowers at the base of the ramp, sunflowers, Ray's favorite. Rook trotted ahead and circled once near the front steps, then settled back down beside Ray's chair. Ray reached into his jacket and pulled out the boy's drawing. He pinned it to the wall just inside the door, near the medals, the old photos, and the first eviction notice he'd ever received. It belonged there, among all the other reminders of what it meant to endure. That night, as the fireworks faded from memory and the town exhaled for the first time in what felt like years, Ray sat with Rook at his side and listened to the silence. It wasn't empty. It was full of everything they'd fought for. The sun rose slowly over Riverbend, casting long golden fingers across the quiet hills. The air was cool and still, thick, with the kind of calm that only comes after a long storm has passed. Ray sat on the porch, wrapped in his flannel blanket, one hand resting gently on Rook's back. The dog was still, eyes half closed, ears alert to the subtle rustling of the breeze and the chirping of birds nesting nearby. Neither of them spoke, not that they ever needed to. The house behind them was silent too, not empty, just peaceful. The kind of silence that spoke more than sound ever could. The ramp still gleamed with the fresh oak stain from the rebuilding weeks earlier. The garden, once a patch of dust, was now lined with young trees, planted by volunteers who had shown up without being asked. At the center of the garden stood a modest stone marker. In honor of those who stayed, who stood, and who guarded the line, no one else would. Beneath the inscription, etched with quiet reverence, were two names, Raymond E. Cole and Rook. Ray hadn't asked for it. In fact, he'd argued against it. But in the end, the town insisted. They said the names didn't just represent two beings, they represented a promise that Riverbend wouldn't go quiet again, that no one would have to fight alone, unseen, or forgotten. He looked out over the field beyond his property, where children were already gathering, their laughter floating through the morning air. There was a new program now, Canine Handler Education for young students. Tessa had helped fund it with donations from all over the country. The kids would spend time with retired service dogs, learning care, responsibility, and most importantly, the value of loyalty. One of them wore a vest labeled Future Canine Handler. Ray had seen him before. The same boy who'd drawn Rook weeks ago, the one who said he wanted to be brave. Ray smiled faintly. Inside the house, things had changed too. The guest room was now used weekly by visiting veterans. A couple from Nevada had just spent the weekend there, recovering from treatment. They'd found Ray's story online and made the trip just to thank him. He hadn't known what to say. They'd just hugged him and said, "You showed us we weren't invisible." Rook shifted his weight and rested his head on Ray's knee. Ray ran a hand over the fur behind his ears. There were grey hairs around the muzzle now, a little more stiffness in the joints, but the eyes hadn't changed. They still held that steady fire, that awareness, that commitment to duty. One Ray knew well. It was the same look he'd seen in mirrors after the war, when the uniform came off, but the fight didn't end. The door creaked open, and Tessa stepped out, holding 2 mugs of coffee. She handed one to Ray and sat beside him on the porch swing. She didn't speak at first, just watched the horizon. "They're naming a bill after you," she finally said. Ray snorted lightly. "They should name it after the ones who didn't come home." "They're naming it the Rook Act," she replied. "Federal protections for veterans facing property seizure, automatic legal assistance, emergency housing resources. First reading goes to the floor next month." Ray nodded, staring straight ahead. "It won't fix everything." "No," she said, "but it'll make sure what happened to you doesn't happen in the dark anymore." Rook stirred again and glanced toward the sound of an approaching engine. A pickup truck eased into view, Tom Reyes behind the wheel. He waved as he passed, slowing just enough to give a thumbs up before heading toward the new community site they were building 5 miles east. Tom was helping coordinate it now, rehabilitation housing for veterans. He looked up at the marble dome above him, then back to the crowd. "We're not asking for favors. We're demanding dignity. We fought for you. Now, fight for us." Silence held for a moment. Then applause rolled through the crowd like thunder. Ray turned to Rook. "You think they heard it?" Rook gave a short bark. Ray smiled. "Yeah, me too." The following days unfolded with a calm Ray hadn't felt in years, not just inside him, but in the town itself. Riverbend, like the rest of the country, had been stirred awake by the march. Newspapers ran full-page features not on scandal or corruption, but on progress. Veteran centers reported a spike in volunteer applications. Local officials in surrounding counties began reviewing their own redevelopment programs. Some suspended them altogether, but none of that mattered to Ray as much as the change he saw closer to home. A new day had been declared, National Recognition Day for Disabled Veterans and Service Animals. The date was set to commemorate the day Rook refused to move. The bill passed unanimously with rare bipartisan support. A small victory on paper, but Ray knew it was much more than that. It was acknowledgement. It was truth, finally spoken in a way that couldn't be dismissed. The ceremony was held in the town square. There were no parades or flyovers, just a gathering of people who understood what it meant to stand for something. Ray was asked to give another speech, but he declined. Instead, he chose to sit quietly on the front row, with Rook beside him and Tessa and Tom close by. Tessa wore a dark green dress and boots scuffed from a week of long travel and late nights. Tom had on his old sheriff's jacket, the badge now replaced by a patch that read, "Community Safety Liaison." Ray didn't comment on it, but he noticed the change. When the governor stepped up to the mic, the crowd grew still. She spoke of courage, of endurance, of quiet resistance. She recounted Ray's refusal to be moved, how Rook had become more than just a companion, how he had become a symbol of what it meant to stand guard when no one else would. As she reached the end of her speech, she turned toward Ray and nodded. This town found its voice because one man stayed put, because one dog made a choice, and because of that, thousands have found the strength to keep moving forward. Then she stepped aside, and the crowd turned toward Ray. He didn't stand. He just raised his hand, a quiet wave, and nodded once. It was enough. Then the fireworks began. Not the kind that split the sky with chaos, but slow, deliberate bursts of color that drifted gently overhead, like the soft reminder of something long overdue. Red, white, and gold filled the night sky, above Riverbend. The crowd stayed still, heads tilted upward, reflections flickering in their eyes. Children sat on their parents' shoulders. Veterans clasped hands, some wiping tears, others smiling in silence. Ray watched it all with his hands folded on his lap and Rook's head resting across his boot. Later, as the last of the crowd dispersed and folding chairs were packed away, a boy about 10 years old approached cautiously. He had a buzz cut, nervous eyes, and something clutched in his hand. Ray smiled as the boy stepped forward and held out a folded paper. "It's for Rook," the boy said. Ray took it, unfolded. The page slowly. It was a drawing, Rook on the porch, his medal around his neck, a house behind him that looked a lot like Ray's. At the top, in large block letters, were the words, "I want to be brave like him." Ray folded the paper again and placed it gently in his jacket pocket. "You already are," he said. The boy smiled and ran back to his family. As the town grew quiet, Ray remained on the square a little longer. Tessa and Tom had gone home, but Rook stayed, ears twitching, eyes alert. Ray looked up at the flag gently swaying above the courthouse. "I don't know what comes next," he said aloud, "but I think we earned a little peace." Rook didn't move. He didn't need to. The silence between them said everything. Eventually, Ray turned back toward the road home. A few volunteers still swept confetti from the pavement. The smell of grilled food lingered in the air. A string of lights hung above the street, casting long, warm shadows across the sidewalk. As he rolled forward, people nodded or tipped their hats. No one rushed him. No one tried to speak over the moment. They just let it exist. Back home, the route was planned from the newly inaugurated Holloway House all the way to the state capitol in Austin, just under 60 miles. 3 days of steady walking, stopping in towns along the way, gathering others as they passed. Ray didn't intend to lead it, but he couldn't be convinced to stay behind either. So he rode at the front in a motorized wheelchair, draped in an American flag, flanked by Rook on his right and Tom Reyes on his left. Behind them, a growing wave of people filled the road. Tessa marched near the middle of the formation, coordinating logistics through a radio clipped to her vest. Food trucks and medics followed at the rear. Along the sidewalks, families stood with handmade signs, some cheering, others just watching with quiet awe. Ray kept his eyes forward. He wasn't here for spectacle. By mid-morning, the group reached the first small town on their path. The mayor, a grey-haired woman in a denim shirt, greeted them with coffee and a short speech. "We remember what happened here," she said. "Not just the scandal, but how you all stood up after it. You reminded us what leadership really looks like." Volunteers had set up cots in a church gymnasium for those staying overnight. Local school children brought sandwiches and bags of chips, giggling as Rook walked through the room, accepting head pats with royal dignity. Ray, though tired, didn't rest right away. He sat with a group of young veterans at the back of the gym, listening more than speaking. They didn't talk about politics or war. They talked about paperwork, about the humiliation of asking for help and being met with silence, about watching friends disappear into addiction or isolation because nobody followed up. Ray didn't offer solutions. He just said, "Keep walking, not for me, for the ones who stopped." On the second day, their numbers had doubled. Word spread online, and cars pulled off the highway to drop off walkers who wanted to join for a few miles. Some wore military gear, others came in jeans and sneakers, but they all walked in rhythm. At one point, a man in a pressed suit approached. From the crowd, an aide to a state senator. He extended a hand to Ray and tried to give him a printed letter of support. Ray didn't take it. "Walk with us," he said. "Then we'll talk." The man hesitated, then removed his jacket and fell in line. By evening, news drones hovered overhead, capturing images of the march snaking through farmland and neighborhoods, winding like a purposeful river. The headlines had changed. No longer about corruption or scandal. Now they read, "A movement begins in Texas. Veterans lead the way. Holloway March reaches halfway point." Ray didn't read the news. He focused on the road. Every inch of it felt earned. His fingers tingled from steering the chair over uneven pavement. His back ached, but he kept going. So did Rook. The dog never once strayed. If anyone tried to come close to Ray too quickly, Rook would move between them without a sound, not as a threat, but as a reminder. This man had already been through enough. On the final morning, just outside the capital's shadow, a park served as the staging point. Thousands had joined now. A sea of flags and hand-lettered signs surrounded Ray's chair. Some read, "Protect," or "Vets." Others simply read, "Thank you." Tom stood beside Ray and leaned close. "You ready?" Ray nodded. "Been ready." When they entered the city proper, traffic halted. Police cleared intersections. Office workers lined the sidewalks. Some clapped, some saluted, some just watched with glassy eyes. The final steps led to the Capitol steps, where a podium had been erected but remained empty. Ray didn't need it. The crowd gathered around him tight and focused, and when the cheering quieted, he lifted the mic handed to him by a volunteer. "I didn't come here to be honored," he began. "I came here because too many people who served this country were forgotten the second they stopped wearing the uniform. I came here because my home was almost taken from me, and it was legal. I came here because when I needed help, the only thing that showed up was a dog who'd been through more than most men." He paused, looked down at Rook, who sat at attention, head high. "This dog didn't save me. He reminded me I was worth saving. So did a lawyer. So did a stranger who changed sides when he realized the truth. And now I see thousands of you here. That's more than support. That's action." It didn't feel like his house anymore. It felt like something larger than him had taken root. "You're sure about this?" Tom nodded. "I've never been more sure of anything." Inside the envelope were more signatures, people from the community, former law enforcement, even one or two of Crowley's former staffers who'd resigned after the scandal broke. It wasn't just Tom turning a corner. It was a collective shift. The non-profit team arrived 2 days later. They brought blueprints, permits, volunteers. A group of retired engineers started assessing the land for accessibility expansions. A nurse practitioner moved into a guest cabin down the road. A former VA counselor offered to lead a trauma support group. Rook took to the new flow of visitors with quiet dignity. He didn't trust everyone immediately, but the ones who showed kindness without reaching, who moved gently and respected the space, those were the ones he eventually sat beside. His instincts remained razor-sharp. Ray helped when he could, not physically. He knew his limitations, but with knowledge. He explained what disabled veterans needed, what services were helpful, what felt like charity, and what felt like empowerment. His voice carried weight now, not just as a survivor, but as a builder. The press asked for interviews again. Ray declined them all. "Let the work speak," he said. Word spread fast. Within weeks, other towns reached out. Ray's story wasn't just viral anymore. It had become a model. Other veterans stepped forward to lead similar efforts in their counties. One woman from Pennsylvania called Tessa and asked if she could fly down just to see the property, to walk the same ground. "I just need to know places like this can exist," she said. The Veterans Support Center officially opened on a Monday morning. A new sign was mounted on the gate, the Holloway House, named not for Ray's legacy but for the idea of shelter, of filling what had been empty. The house became headquarters. Ray's porch became the reception area. His kitchen was now a break room for staff and visiting families. On opening day, a crowd gathered, not just for the ribbon cutting, but to volunteer. Some came with skills, others came with stories, all came with purpose. Tom stood beside Ray at the edge of the ramp. "You think Crowley ever thought it would turn into this?" Ray smirked. "I don't think he thought past the land contract." Tessa arrived a moment later, holding 2 mugs of coffee, one for Ray, one for Tom. "You did it," she said. Ray shook his head. "No, we did it. And it ain't done yet." Later that day, a new visitor arrived. A man in his early 30s with a tight jaw, shaved head, and tattoos running up his forearms. He walked slow, hesitated at the gate, then stepped forward. Rook walked out to meet him. The man knelt, let the dog sniff his hand, and didn't move. Until Rook gave a slow wag of approval. "You Ray Cole?" the man asked. "I am. I used to run with one of Crowley's crews. Didn't know the whole truth, but I knew enough to be ashamed. I've been clean a year now, saw what you did here. I was wondering if maybe I could help." Ray studied him a long moment. "What can you do?" "I build, mostly wood, fencing, framing." Ray looked to the new barn being raised on the far side of the property. "Go see if they need hands, and if you're lying, Rook'll let me know." The man nodded and left his name at the gate. Rook returned to Ray's side and laid down with a satisfied grunt. In the distance, hammers rang against fresh lumber, and the sound wasn't just construction anymore. It was healing. They gathered. At dawn, just before the sky broke open with its usual Texas gold, rows of boots lined the steps of the community center, scuffed and worn but steady. Some belonged to young men fresh out of service, others to retirees long out of uniform. Civilians joined them too, teachers, nurses, carpenters, clerks, ordinary. People who'd been following the story and showed up not out of obligation, but belief. The kind born from watching someone else take the first step and realizing it was possible. The march had been organized quietly. No political banners, no party lines, no grandstanding. Just a clear purpose: to bring attention to veterans who had been ignored, to demand safeguards for those still vulnerable to the kind of bureaucratic assault Ray had endured. Ray's face appeared on every major news outlet. Not as a spectacle, not framed in controversy, but celebrated. They showed the footage of Rook refusing to move. They played clips of Tom Reyes's testimony, Tessa's interviews, and the slow, painful unspooling of the truth. The narrative was no longer about a man fighting eviction. It was about loyalty, sacrifice. What happens when you corner someone who's already given everything and they decide not to break? An invitation came next. A televised town hall requested his appearance. Ray declined, not out of spite, but because he didn't feel the need to stand on another stage. He told them to talk to Tessa instead. She'd been the one who held the line with him. And they did. Tessa's words carried the same clarity they always had. She didn't dramatize, didn't embellish. She just told the truth. That the system had failed, and one man's refusal to give up helped everyone see it. Rook became a symbol almost overnight. Schools printed his photo with captions like, "Courage doesn't bark loud, it just stands." Affirm. A group of high school students from Nebraska launched a campaign to raise funds for retired K-9s. A small town in Arizona built a statue of a German shepherd on its courthouse lawn. They named it the Sentinel. Ray didn't watch the interviews or read the articles. He didn't have to. He lived the story already. And what mattered most to him was unfolding right outside his door. Neighbors who used to avoid his property now stopped by to talk. They brought pies, toolkits, books, handwritten letters. One woman left a note tucked under a coffee tin. "My husband didn't make it home, but I think he would have stood beside you. Thank you for doing what we couldn't." One evening, Ray found a small envelope wedged into the mailbox. No return address. Inside was a military ribbon, the kind awarded posthumously. A folded note simply read, "He would have followed your lead." Ray didn't cry, but he held the ribbon for a long time, his fingers curled around it like it might vanish if he let go. That night, as the house fell into stillness and the wind rolled softly through the fields, Ray sat on the porch with Rook. The flag above them snapped lightly in the breeze. The stars were out, unbothered and bright. Rook lay at Ray's feet, the medal on his collar catching the moonlight. For the first time in years, Ray felt seen, not for the scars he carried, not for the battles he lost or won, but for who he'd become after the fight. And beside him, the dog who refused to move still stood guard. 2 weeks passed since the medal ceremony, and the air in the county changed. The tension that once simmered like a slow-burning fire had cooled, replaced by something more uncertain, more fragile, possibility. Not everyone celebrated Ray's recognition. A few hardliners in the county still defended Crowley's actions, brushing them off as administrative missteps. But the silence from their corner grew louder with each passing day, as more people came forward with their own stories. Veterans, widows, disabled citizens, all quietly pushed aside in the name of redevelopment. What surprised Ray the most wasn't the support. It was who some of it came from. Tom Reyes showed up again, this time in plain clothes, holding a folded manila envelope and a construction hat under one arm. He stepped up onto the porch slowly, waiting for Rook to signal he was welcome. The dog stood, sniffed, then turned back to his spot by Ray's chair without issue. That was Rook's approval. "I took a job with a non-profit in Austin," Tom said. "Veteran outreach. They're sending teams to towns like this, places where the system failed, places that need help rebuilding." Ray looked him over. "You planning to stay long?" Tom offered a faint smile. "I'm here to ask your permission, actually. They want to make this place your home, their first satellite center. Not to replace anything, just to expand what you started." Ray didn't speak right away. He studied the envelope in Tom's hands. "What's in there?" "Deed transfer papers," Tom said, "with your name on them, and a proposal. They want to turn your place into a center for disabled veterans, job training, therapy, housing for those transitioning out of VA care. It stays yours. You live here, but it becomes more than just a house." Ray glanced around at the quiet fields, the rebuilt ramp, the freshly painted eaves, the new shingles that still smelled of pine. "This flew over the Capitol this morning," he said. "They wanted it to fly here next." Ray accepted the flag without words. His hands didn't shake, but his eyes didn't blink for a long time. Behind him, a new flagpole had already been installed. The flag was raised as the crowd stood in silence, hats removed, heads bowed. No music played, no anthems. Just the steady sound of rope through pulley, of fabric catching the breeze. After the flag reached the top, someone began to clap. Others joined. Then everyone. It wasn't raucous, it wasn't choreographed. It was reverent and proud and quiet. Enough for the wind to speak through the applause. Tessa leaned close to Ray. "You okay?" He nodded once. "Yeah, better than I deserve." "No," she said softly. "Exactly what you deserve." That evening, someone lit a small fire in a pit near the new ramp. Folding chairs appeared from nowhere. Coolers opened and plates were passed around. Someone brought a guitar. Stories were shared, some funny, some quiet, some full of pain, but always ending in a kind of release. Veterans told tales they hadn't told in decades. Civilians listened with respect. Ray didn't talk much. He didn't have to. Every time someone asked him how he was feeling, he just looked around and said, "Better now." Rook lay at his feet, the toy bone still nearby, untouched but never far. When the last embers of the fire dimmed and people began to head home, Ray looked up at the sky. It was clear, no clouds, no noise, just the flag overhead and the dog by his side. He hadn't won a war, he hadn't toppled a regime, he just stayed. And for once, staying had been enough to change everything. The morning after the rebuild, Ray woke to the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. Not a dusty pickup or a volunteer truck this time, but a sleek black sedan with tinted windows and federal plates. It moved slowly, respectfully, as if aware of the weight of every inch it crossed. Ray watched from the porch, Rook already alert and standing beside him. The car stopped at the base of the ramp, and a woman in a navy suit stepped out, carrying a small leather-bound case in one hand and a thin folder in the other. She introduced herself as Agent Miriam Davis from the Department of Veterans Affairs, Special Commendations Division. Her tone was warm, her movements efficient, and her eyes held that sharp attentiveness Ray had seen in field officers, the kind of people who remembered names, faces, dates. "We've been watching everything unfold," she said, "and reviewing the footage, the files, the testimony." Ray said nothing, just nodded. Rook stayed by his side, calm but unmoving. "Mr. Cole," Agent Davis continued, "on behalf of the Department of Veterans Affairs and with authorization from the President of the United States, it is my honor to inform you that you are to be awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom." Ray blinked slowly. He had received medals before, plenty of them. Bronze stars, purple hearts, folded flags and handshakes. But this one? This one wasn't. For what he'd done on the battlefield. It was for what he'd done after, when no one was watching, when no one was supposed to care anymore. He nodded again. "Do I have to give a speech?" "You already did," she said, smiling softly. And the whole country heard it. She handed him the leather case. Inside, set into velvet, was the medal, gold, heavy, unmistakable. A glint of recognition sparked in Ray's eyes, not because he wanted the honor, but because it meant people were finally seeing what had been invisible for too long. Rook barked once, low and steady, and Agent Davis knelt to open the second case. "We didn't forget him," she said. "Rook has been recognized by the National K-9 Valor Foundation and the Department of Defense. They've created a new honor, the K-9 Medal for Civilian Defense, and he is the first recipient." The medal came with a ribbon collar, engraved plaque, and official certification. Ray took it from her hands, ran a finger over the metal, then slowly fastened it around Rook's neck. The dog stood still, dignified, ears forward like he knew exactly what it meant. Photos were taken. Just a few, quiet and respectful. No fanfare, no press. Agent Davis shook Ray's hand, thanked him again, and left as quietly as she arrived. By the time her car disappeared down the gravel road, the porch had fallen back into its familiar silence. But the country hadn't. Later that afternoon, Tom was in front of cameras, sitting beside Tessa with Rook nearby. The live stream had over 2 million viewers in less than an hour. His confession was raw, unvarnished. He didn't cry. He didn't grandstand. He just spoke about what he saw, what he ignored, what he now refused to be a part of. He named Crowley, the officials in league with him, and even described the training sessions where agents were told how to peacefully evict problem cases. Veterans around the country lit up the internet with reactions, many outraged, but many expressing a kind of solemn understanding. Some mistakes are rooted in blind loyalty, but standing up when it's hardest counts for more. When the live stream ended, Tessa looked at Ray. "This changes everything." "No," Ray replied quietly. "This starts everything." Outside, the crowd began to chant, not against something, but for someone. Not for a dog or a man or a cause, but for truth that finally had a voice. Rook lay by the door, eyes half closed, his body still alert. Ray watched him for a moment, then closed his own eyes. For the first time since the letter arrived, he felt the weight shift. The nation had seen the dog that wouldn't move. Now they were hearing the man who finally did. The dust had barely settled. From Tom's confession, when the first trucks began to arrive, they didn't carry enforcement or news crews this time. They carried lumber, concrete mix, fresh siding, steel brackets, donations from strangers. Messages painted on the sides read things like, "We stand with Ray and not all heroes stand." One truck driver had come from as far as Ohio, an old Marine who said he watched the live stream and couldn't sit still. It wasn't just about Ray anymore. It was about everyone who had been pushed aside, counted out, or silenced. Ray sat under the porch awning, watching the activity unfold. A young man in jeans and a flannel shirt was unloading wooden beams from the back of a flatbed. A woman with a clipboard organized volunteers who'd shown up from nearby counties. Some were veterans, some weren't. None of them had been asked to come, and none were being paid. They just came. Tessa had set up a temporary station near the edge of the property where teams could check in, receive assignments, and coordinate the restoration effort. She'd barely slept, but the energy around her seemed to keep her going. Her voice carried calmly over the noise of hammering and drills. Rook moved between groups like a quiet guardian, inspecting the work, receiving the occasional pat or scratch, then moving on. He wasn't barking, he wasn't pacing. He was participating in his own way. Ray's ramp was the first to be rebuilt. It had been functional, but barely. Now, a new one extended from the porch in a gentle, sweeping arc, wide, enough for 2 chairs to pass. It was solid oak, sanded and stained, with handrails strong enough to take on a storm. A group of engineers from a local university had offered to design it. When they asked Ray if he wanted anything special, he simply said, "Make it last longer." "Then I will." By noon, a new roof was being installed. The old one had leaked for years, patched with tar and plastic sheeting. But now, proper shingles were being laid, and the underlying rot was removed plank by plank. It wasn't just repair, it was transformation. Inside, volunteers worked to widen hallways, add touch-sensitive lighting, and install new appliances that didn't require bending or lifting. Ray hadn't asked for any of this, but they did it anyway. Rook stayed close to the house most of the day, taking breaks only when Ray called him in for water. At one point, a small group of children arrived with their parents, holding handmade signs that read, "Thank you, Rook, and heroes have 4 legs too." One girl, maybe 6 or 7, held out a squeaky toy shaped like a bone. Rook took it gently and placed it at Ray's feet. Ray chuckled. "Think she wants me to play fetch?" The girl giggled and waved. Rook sat beside Ray, the toy untouched, as if he understood the gesture wasn't about playing, it was about thanks. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting amber light across the fields, a man stepped forward carrying a folded American flag. He wore a dark suit, not a government-issued one, but respectful and clean. He introduced himself as a representative from a coalition of veteran families. With solemn hands, he unfolded the flag and presented it to Ray, crashing into the side table as Rook pinned him with bone-breaking force. The second man hesitated at the doorway, eyes wide, gun half raised. But then the flash of red and blue flooded the yard, sirens wailing in the distance. Not just local, federal. Tessa had reached the road and sent the location. Law enforcement had been monitoring the data release in real time. The raid was no longer silent. It was public. The men ran, scattering into the brush, but not fast enough. The officers arrived with speed and precision. Ray heard the crunch of boots and the shouts of commands. 2 sets of hands found his shoulders gently, checking his pulse, asking questions. He didn't answer right away. He was watching Rook. The dog stood still, breathing hard, eyes locked on the empty space where the intruders had been. Only after. The cuffs clicked around the last man's wrists did he move to Ray's side. "You did good," Ray whispered. Outside, the federal agents swept the property. Inside, Tessa returned with 2 deputies at her side, a file clutched in one hand, the plastic envelope still intact in the other. "You were right," she said. "That was their endgame." Ray shook his head slowly. "No," he said, voice like gravel. "This is ours." The night after the failed raid left the town simmering with questions and unresolved tension. Ray sat in his chair near the window, the house still humming with quiet energy. Across from him, Tessa paced, her fingers twitching as she reviewed. The media feeds on her tablet. Rook lay between them, his head up, ears twitching at every creak. The files transmitted during the raid were already causing ripples. Major news outlets had picked them up within minutes, and the Department of Justice acknowledged receipt with a rare public statement. Serious allegations under investigation. What no one expected, however, was the knock on Ray's door. Just after sunrise, It wasn't the police, nor the media, but Tom Reyes, the same officer who had once tried to remove Rook by force. He stood on the porch, unarmed, uniform disheveled, eyes hollow. Ray opened the door with caution, but Rook didn't growl this time. He only stared, unmoving, as if assessing something deeper than posture or intent. Tom looked down at the dog, then back to Ray. "I came to apologize," he said, voice low but clear. "And to talk." Ray didn't move, didn't answer immediately. The old veteran in him remained guarded, but the man who'd learned to trust again, to fight not just with weapons but with truth, finally nodded and stepped aside. Inside, the air was thick with tension. Tom sat on the edge of the couch, like a man prepared for judgment. He didn't offer excuses. Instead, he took out his phone and placed it on the table, playing a voice memo. The recording was short but damning. Nathan Crowley giving explicit orders to remove the problem before it festers, naming Ray, Rook, and even Tessa directly. Tom leaned forward. "That was 3 days ago. I've recorded every conversation since." Ray remained silent. Tessa's eyes never left Tom, her arms crossed, her mouth a thin line. "I joined because I believed we were helping people," Tom said. "I didn't know what Crowley was really doing, but that doesn't excuse me from carrying out his orders. I've been part of this. I can't undo that, but I can stop it now." Ray exchanged a glance with Tessa. For the first time, her expression softened. "You're willing to testify?" she asked. "Live, on camera, under oath," Tom answered. "Whatever it takes." Tessa turned away, pacing to the window. She stared out at the group of neighbors across the street assembling signs, some bearing messages of solidarity, others quotes from Ray's recent online videos. The country was watching. They needed more than words. They needed undeniable proof. Tom Reyes might be that. Ray finally broke the silence. "You knew about the file drop?" Tom nodded. "We were monitoring all comms. Crowley lost it when he saw it had gone live. That's why he sent the mercs. I tried to stop it." "You didn't," Tessa snapped. "No," Tom agreed, his voice weighted with guilt. "But I didn't help them either." A long silence passed. Before Rook stood and walked to Tom, the dog stared up at him for a moment, then sat down at his feet. Tom blinked, caught off guard. He reached a tentative hand toward the dog's head but didn't touch him. "He's got a better sense of people than I ever did," Ray muttered. By noon, the camera mounted between his shoulders, streaming every moment through his eyes. The angle captured something the others missed. The way Ray sat tall despite the wheels, the way Crowley looked smaller with every lie, and the way the courtroom held its breath each time Rook shifted. When the footage hit 2 million views, the comments changed. Not just support, not just outrage, but promises from attorneys, from retired service members, from people who had also received letters in the mail. Ray didn't have to fight alone anymore. What he had started had become something much bigger than his land. It was a reckoning, and in the middle of it, sitting in an old wooden house with peeling paint and dusty windows, was a paralyzed veteran and his dog, watching the truth burn. Through lies like fire through paper, they came just before dawn, in silence. No sirens, no knock at the door, no official paper trail. 3 black trucks, all unmarked, rolled down the gravel road with their headlights off, stopping just out of range of the floodlight Rook had grown used to patrolling under. Ray saw them first, through the kitchen window, steam from his coffee, curling upward as he reached to mute the house lights. Tessa was asleep on the couch, documents scattered on her chest. She stirred when Ray rolled past, slow and quiet, and looked out the front door. Rook was already awake. He moved to the window. With military calm, his gaze narrowing, ears angled toward the far-off sound of idling engines. Ray didn't say a word. He didn't have to. Rook moved to the entryway and sat, waiting, not scared, not anxious. "Ready, Tessa," Ray said, voice low. "They're here." She sat up, blinked hard, then moved to the laptop and started downloading the most sensitive files to a flash drive. She didn't ask what "here" meant. She'd seen enough in the past weeks to recognize the final card being played. "They want to make it disappear," she said quietly. "No court, no cameras, just a fire and a footnote." Ray rolled over to the bookshelf and pulled a latch. Behind it, a small safe embedded in the wall. He opened it and handed Tessa a plastic envelope with 6 flash drives and 3 backup affidavits. "Take this," he said. "Out the back. Leave now." "I'm not leaving. You need to get this to the right hands. If they get through me, someone has to keep this alive." Tessa shook her head. "We're past the point of one man being the difference, Ray." He locked eyes with her. "You're not wrong, but sometimes one man buys the other's time. Before." She could argue. A thud echoed from the side of the house, something hard hitting the barn wall. Then another, closer to the front. Rook let out a single sharp bark and ran to the back room. A second later, the lights cut out. Entire house plunged into dark. "Go now," Ray ordered. Tessa hesitated only once before grabbing the envelope, tucking it under her jacket and disappearing through the back porch. Ray rolled toward the living room, moving into position beside the main window, the handle of his old sidearm tucked beneath the armrest. He hadn't fired a shot in years, but his hand didn't shake as he checked the chamber. Outside, the trucks, revered. One of them surged forward, crashing through the outer fence. 2 men stepped out, dark clothes, masks, each holding what looked like a fuel can. They moved quickly, targeting the barn first. But what they didn't know, what no one outside that house knew, was that Ray had rigged the property, motion sensors, cameras, and one small transmitter buried beneath the porch steps, linked to a backup internet battery that broadcasted everything to a secure server. The moment they stepped onto his property, every camera began streaming, and the moment Rook activated the trigger hidden under the deck, the files went live. Every last one of them. Internal memos, audio recordings, the whistleblower's full statement, drone footage, the anonymous photographs, even the recording of Crowley's post-hearing phone call threatening retaliation. The data dump hit the internet in waves. Newsrooms, government inboxes, activist networks. By the time the first masked man set foot on the porch, his face was already being identified by veterans on social media. Ray sat still as the man kicked in the door and froze, confused by the calm inside. Then Rook launched. Not like before, not to intimidate, to protect. The man went down hard, ordering one of his men to shut that cripple down before the press gets wind. The room went dead quiet. The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Crowley, do you deny that's your voice?" Crowley swallowed hard. I need to speak with my attorney." "You're under oath," the judge snapped, and just like that the smirk vanished. Outside, as the live stream ended, people began gathering around Ray, not to talk, just to stand near him, to be seen with him, like a shield of flesh and memory. Rook sat at his side, silent, and the system that had treated them both like obstacles was starting to tremble. The next 48 hours unfolded like the slow collapse of a condemned building. Crowley left the courthouse under tight escort, no longer walking like a man in control. His attorney refused comment. The press tried to corner him at his vehicle, but he ducked beneath the camera lights and slammed the door without a word. Within an hour, 3 more officials in neighboring counties had their names tied to the same land development scheme. Ray didn't need to read every headline to know what was happening. The wall was crumbling, and now the architects were scrambling to dodge the bricks. Back at the house, the porch light stayed on through the night. Rook barely left Ray's side, moving with the practiced stillness of something waiting for a second wave. The energy on the property had changed again. The silence wasn't threatening now. It was tense, like something cornered. They had forced Crowley's hand, and the man was not the type to retreat with dignity. Tessa remained in town, working from a motel just off the highway. She'd established contact with a handful of state auditors, 2 journalists, and a federal land review officer who'd confirmed off the record that a formal investigation had been opened. Everything was in motion. But no one knew what Crowley would try next. That made him dangerous. Ray understood that intimately. He spent most of the next morning reinforcing the barn with salvaged timber and steel siding. Not because he thought they'd come with fire, but because he didn't trust that they wouldn't. He placed Rook's feed bowl closer to the kitchen door and moved the emergency generator out of sight. Every precaution felt like a step toward inevitability. He didn't need to be told what retaliation looked like. He'd seen it in uniform, and now he was watching it with civilian eyes. Late in the afternoon, Tessa arrived with a black case and a copy of a wire transfer receipt. Inside the case was a copy of the full affidavit filed by the whistleblower, the man who had dropped the briefcase near the fence weeks earlier. His name had been redacted, but his words were clear. He had worked under Crowley for nearly 2 years, tasked with identifying removal priority lots. Veterans were labeled high risk, not because they posed danger, but because they rarely fought back. Until now, Ray didn't say much as he read the statement, just underlined 3 dates, folded the papers, and placed them in the same metal box. He kept beneath the kitchen sink. His hand lingered on the latch before he closed it. Then he looked at Tessa. "Is this enough?" She hesitated. In a just world, it would be more than enough. But in this one, she exhaled, "It's a damn good start." That night, the house felt heavier than usual. The moon hung low and red through a haze of dust, casting long shadows over the yard. Around 11, Rook growled from the back room and stalked toward the porch. Ray followed, every joint in his shoulders tensed. They reached the door just as 2 dark vehicles slowed at the edge of the drive. No lights, no sound. But the message was loud. Ray didn't move. Rook stood at the top of the ramp, teeth bared now, posture low, a deep rumble vibrating from his chest. Tessa, watching from the front room, grabbed her phone and hit record. The vehicles idled for a long minute, then pulled away without a word. Ray turned to her. "They're testing the line." Tessa nodded. "And they just found out it doesn't bend." The next day brought the final blow. The live stream was uploaded, not just to news outlets, but to veteran forums, land rights communities, and watchdog sites. It featured Ray's testimony, Crowley's unraveling, and a synchronized display of every document the whistleblower had provided. But it wasn't just the evidence that made it powerful. It was Rook. The dog had stood beside Ray throughout the hearing. The wind had changed again. It no longer whispered threat. It promised exposure. Ray's property had become something else entirely, less like a home and more like a listening post. The cameras never stopped. The radios picked up movement before. Eyes could confirm it. And inside the house, stacks of evidence lined the walls, each folder marked, each document catalogued. Tessa had transformed the living room into a command center, balancing her laptop on a tray table and fielding encrypted emails from contacts she wouldn't name. Outside, Rook moved like clockwork, making slow patrols along the perimeter, pausing at fence posts, sniffing for changes, ever alert. Ray no longer had to call him. The dog moved with the rhythm of the house, always watching, always ready. Story had finally broken. A respected investigative journalist from a major national outlet had gone live with the first piece. It was careful, well-documented, and brutal. Names were named. Crowley's face was on the homepage beside scanned letters, court filings, and satellite maps of cleared land. Ray didn't care about the press, but the silence that followed from Crowley's office said everything. No denials, no statements, just a withdrawal into shadow. But exposure wasn't enough. They needed confirmation. They needed him to crack under the weight of scrutiny. And for that, Tessa had a plan. "We request a public hearing," she said one evening, tapping her pen against the table. "Force Crowley into the spotlight. Force him to testify under oath." "They won't allow it," Ray said. "Not willingly." "No," she said, "but if we file an injunction based on land seizure misconduct, it's standard procedure to hold a preliminary hearing." He'll have to show up. It's public record. Ray leaned back. And while he testifies, we live stream it. I've got techs ready to link up. We don't just make a case, we make a statement. Ray nodded slowly. What about the security risk? That's where your friend comes in. The following day, Ray made a call to someone he hadn't spoken to since Walter Reed, a man named Benjamin Tate, a former intelligence officer turned cybersecurity specialist. 2 days later, Tate arrived in an unmarked pickup with solar cases, cell jammers, and a broadcast-ready camera harness built for Rook. They'll be watching, Tate said. You want to keep the story honest? Let the dog film it. So they did. On the morning of the hearing, Ray dressed in a clean shirt, stiff with sun-dried starch, and loaded into Tessa's Jeep with Rook at his side. The dog wore the harness, like it was just another piece of gear, strapped across his shoulders, small camera sitting between the blades. He didn't flinch. He never did. The courthouse in San Angelo was quiet when they arrived, but the line of press vans outside said otherwise. Inside, the courtroom was half full. Reporters lined the benches. A few families watched with wary eyes. Some wore hats embroidered with service branches. Veterans, Ray thought, watching closely. Crowley entered with his usual smirk, flanked by a sharp-suited attorney and a man in a grey government-issued windbreaker. His eyes passed over Ray like he wasn't even there. That changed quickly when he saw Rook, who locked eyes and didn't look away. The judge called the room to order. Proceedings began. Tessa opened with precision. She introduced the injunction, the allegations of abuse, the forged inspections. She kept her voice level, but the facts hit like blunt force. Crowley's lawyer objected, often and loudly, but each time was overruled. Then came the evidence, not speculation, not hearsay. Documents, contracts, emails, payment trails. Crowd gasped more than once. Crowley shifted in his seat, his smirk growing thinner each minute. Then it was his turn. He took the stand with the confidence of a man who had dodged real consequences for years. But this time, it wasn't just the courtroom listening. Every word was being streamed through Rook's camera to over 1 million viewers online. It wasn't just testimony. It was a confession waiting to happen, and it came faster than anyone expected. When pressed about specific contracts, Crowley fumbled. When shown a letter with his signature authorizing forced entry onto Ray's land, he stalled, asked for a recess. The judge denied it. Then Tessa played a voicemail, a grainy, clipped recording sent anonymously the week prior. It was Crowley's voice, angry, cornered, isolation. Only this time, Ray wasn't isolated. He had a dog with combat in his blood and something stronger than orders keeping him close, and a lawyer who hadn't run even when the front line came to her doorstep. They wanted him to feel alone. But he wasn't. By the time Tessa arrived, the front yard had changed. The worn path to the porch was flanked with fresh dirt, where Ray had buried new cables, feeds for additional cameras and motion sensors. A secondary light rig had been rigged along the edge of the barn roof. Nothing flashy, nothing obvious. But it was there. Tessa parked close to the house and stepped out without hesitation, wearing a black windbreaker and a face that hadn't slept much. Rook stood on the porch, watching her like a soldier reviewing incoming support. When she nodded, he turned and trotted inside. That was his way of saying she passed. Ray met her at the door. He didn't speak right away, just opened it and rolled back as she came in, with a satchel under one arm and 2 folders tucked beneath the other. She moved straight to the kitchen, dropped everything on the table, and began unpacking the mess. "Got a call from a man in Washington," she said, voice clipped, tired. "Retired colonel, friend of your old commander. Heard about the videos, asked if you were the same Cole from Cop Haskin." Ray nodded. "I am." "Well," she said, sliding a file across to him. "He's about to go public." Ray opened it slowly. Inside were documents, memos, interagency communications, and something worse. Internal reports from a federal land management program, redacted in places but still readable enough to see what was happening. They'd created a plan, quiet, surgically implemented, to identify properties held by disabled or elderly veterans in economically valuable regions. These weren't just chance evictions, these were tactical acquisitions. Land seized through policy, hidden behind a curtain of bureaucracy, rubber-stamped with fabricated inspections and padded court orders. It wasn't Crowley's idea. He was just one of the pawns. Tessa pointed to a list of counties. Concho, Andrews, Reeves, it's all in rural areas with rising commercial interest. This is about pipelines, private housing deals, and state contracts no one wants in the headlines. Ray sat back, and I was the first to resist publicly. The first with a camera and a dog who wouldn't back down. For a while neither spoke, just the low hum of the refrigerator and the occasional chirp from a motion sensor blinking blue over the doorframe. Media's circling, she continued. They're hungry and scared. They've seen stories like this disappear. I got 2 news anchors asking to interview you on neutral ground. I said no. Good. But there's something else. She pulled out a printed email. Crowley's being protected. There's a judge 2 layers above him, federal, not county, who's been approving all these seizures. His name's mentioned in an old memo from 2018 about a veteran reassignment. Directive. Ray's eyes scanned the memo, his jaw locked. This is military, he said, not official, but someone with access had a hand in designing this. Tessa nodded slowly. Your old commander. He wants to go public too. He's got documents, logs, internal correspondence. He kept everything. He didn't know what it was for at the time. But now, Ray finished the sentence. Now, he sees what they built. The weight of it pressed down hard. It wasn't just about him, not anymore. It wasn't even about the house. It was about the system that decided some people were expendable once they stopped wearing the uniform. A system that treated loyalty like a contract that expired once the cost got too high. Outside, the wind picked up. Rook moved to the door again. His tail didn't wag. He just watched the road, ears forward. Ray rolled closer to the table, took out a Sharpie, and began circling names on the memos. We build a wall of proof, he said, and we give it to everyone. If the system's rotten, then we bypass it. We go direct. Tessa looked up at him, eyes heavy but resolute. That's going to make them panic. Ray nodded once. Let them. Panic makes them sloppy. That night, they stayed up sorting files, printing redundancies, burning USB drives. Ray set aside 1 copy and sealed it in a weatherproof pouch. He walked it out to the barn with Rook flanking him and buried it beneath the feed trough, just in case by morning. Water blurred the view, but headlights still burned through the downpour, slow-moving, low-idling threats that never got close enough to confront, never far enough to forget. Tessa had called earlier. She was safe in Austin, but nervous. Someone had broken into her apartment. Nothing stolen, just files turned upside down. She didn't need to say it. They both knew what it meant. The briefcase Ray had found hadn't just shifted the game, it had exposed it. By the time the storm cleared, the tension hadn't. Ray opened the door to check the perimeter at dawn, and Rook lunged forward before he even touched the handle. His ears pinned back, a low growl rolling up from his chest. That's when Ray saw the black SUV at the end of the drive. It didn't have government plates, no decals. The windows were too dark, too clean. 3 men stood beside it. Not law, enforcement. Their posture was wrong, too relaxed, too confident. These weren't paper pushers. These were men hired to solve problems without asking questions. Ray stayed on the porch. Rook sat, not barking, just staring them down like a veteran sizing up a new enemy. One of the men waved and took a few steps forward, stopping just inside. The gate without opening it. His smile was casual, but his eyes were dead. "Mr. Cole," the man said, "you've attracted a lot of attention." "Not interested in making new friends," Ray replied. "That's a shame. We came a long way to help you understand something." "You don't strike me as helpful." The man chuckled. "No, I suppose I'm not." He reached into his coat, not for a weapon, but for a manila envelope. He held it up and tossed it gently over the gate. It landed in the mud. "You're making powerful people nervous," the man said. People who prefer quiet arrangements. They don't like cameras. They don't like dogs. And they really don't like veterans who refuse to go quietly. Ray didn't answer. You've got time to reconsider, the man added, but not much. Nobody wants this to get ugly. Then leave, Ray said, because I guarantee you, ugly's what you're walking into. The man didn't flinch. Last chance, Mr. Cole. That dog steps out of line. He won't be your problem anymore. We're not bound by the same leash the county wears. They left without another word, just turned, climbed into the SUV and drove off, tires slicing, the wet gravel as they disappeared over the hill. Ray waited until they were gone, then wheeled himself down to the envelope. Inside were photographs of him, of Rook, of Tessa. One showed the house from a drone angle. Another caught Rook mid-patrol near the fence line. Every image said the same thing. We're watching and we're close. He took the photos inside, laid them on the table, and stared at them under the kitchen light. Rook sat at the back door, now growling low, gaze fixed on the tree line. Ray didn't bother trying to calm him. He felt it too, the difference between intimidation and intent. These men weren't part of Crowley's system. They were outsiders, private, paid. That night, the road saw new traffic, not just government sedans or neighbors too afraid to wave. These were bigger vehicles, trucks, SUVs, some parked at the edge of the property, engines humming for hours before disappearing again. A drone buzzed overhead once, then again, until Ray pulled out his father's old radio jammer and cut it out of the sky. Rook fetched the wreckage, dropping it at Ray's feet like a gift. Tessa called again the next morning, voice thin with exhaustion. They're escalating. I filed complaints with the state bar, sent the documents to 2 news outlets. We need time. We're out of time, Ray said. What are you going to do? Ray looked down at Rook, who stood near the door, still as a shadow. We hold the line, like we've always done. But this isn't war, Ray, he paused. Feels close enough. She was silent for a moment. I'm coming back. I'll be there tomorrow. It's not safe. Neither is watching from the sidelines. As the call ended, Ray turned to the wall and pinned one of the drone photos beside the others. The living room had become a war room. Maps, schedules, shifts in vehicle movement, angles of approach. He tracked them the way he used to track insurgents outside a compound in Helmand. The difference was, this time, the war had come to him. The enemy wasn't foreign. It wore cologne, drove clean vehicles, and spoke fluent legalese. But the method was the same. Pressure, fear. Ray had caught the dog watching the corners of the house before he himself even sensed something was wrong. The road outside remained quiet, but that quiet no longer felt natural. It felt forced, like something had been cleared away to make room for what was coming next. After the incident with the officers and the viral footage of Rook's protest, people began reaching out in droves. Some offered money, some offered guns. Ray declined both. What he needed wasn't firepower, it was truth, evidence, and someone who understood how to get both into the right hands. That's when the letter came. Not an email, not a phone call. A real letter, no return address. Inside was a card. It read, "You need legal fire. I'm a match." On the back a name, Tessa Whitlow, and a phone number with an Austin area code. Ray didn't trust lawyers. He'd been run in circles by them. For years through disability claims, insurance reviews, compensation hearings. But something about the way she reached out, quiet, deliberate, not looking for the spotlight, made him dial the number. She answered on the second ring. Raymond Cole. Yes, this call isn't being recorded. I'm not affiliated with the press or any political campaign. I'm a private litigator. My specialty is land abuse cases. I've taken down men like Crowley before. I've seen what they do to veterans. Why me? He asked. Because you didn't break. And because that dog of yours made the world stop. Ray didn't speak. I want to help, she said. But it won't be fast, and it won't be safe. I'm not either, Ray said. They met 2 days later. Tessa arrived in an old green Jeep, boots caked with courthouse dust, her brown hair tied back, eyes sharp and alert. She didn't shake Ray's hand, but instead looked him over like a soldier surveying a comrade's wounds. Then she sat across from him at the kitchen table, laid out a file thick with documents, and began pointing to patterns, land audits, development permits, and falsified environmental assessments signed off under Crowley's name. She traced lines between fake contractors and shell companies, most of them linked to a single holding firm out of Dallas with a quiet history of seizing veteran-owned property through legal loopholes. "It's bigger than him," she said. "He's just the local face, the leverage. But if we can expose him, the whole stack starts to wobble." Ray listened, his arms folded, eyes locked on each page as if they were tactical maps. "You're telling me I'm not the only one?" "Dozens," she said. "Maybe more. They all got hit with different tactics, eviction threats, code violations, mental health reviews. But the core was the same. No public resistance, no chance to organize." Ray leaned back. "So how do we do it different? We make this public, strategic, and slow. We gather evidence, we build the narrative, and we don't let them change the story." That night, as Tessa left, Rook followed her to the edge of the drive, sniffed her tires, then returned to Ray's side like nothing had happened. It was the dog's way of saying he approved. Ray didn't argue. The next day, everything changed. Ray was reviewing surveillance footage when he saw something. A man at the edge of the property, in the tall grass near the southern fence line. The figure moved fast, dropped something, then retreated. Ray rolled outside, Rook pacing beside him. They found it in minutes, a leather briefcase partially unzipped. Inside were papers, some of them marked with Crowley's office letterhead, others stamped from a firm that hadn't been publicly tied to the case yet. Ray brought it in, gloved his hands, and laid the documents out on the kitchen table. Blueprints, emails, payments. It wasn't just corruption. It was coordination. Crowley wasn't acting alone. These weren't just land grabs. They were part of a larger program, maybe even state-funded, that had found a target class, disabled veterans. He called Tessa immediately. "I've got something. Somebody wanted me to find it." He heard her breath hitch on the line. "Be careful, Ray. That kind of truth gets people followed." "I already am." And as the line went dead, Rook sat by the door, ears forward, waiting, because now it wasn't just about saving his house. It was about exposing the machine behind it. The rain came heavy that night, hammering the roof like it had a score to settle. Ray stayed near the front window, Rook beside him, both watching the road through the curtain's edge. The morning light cut through the clouds with an almost surgical sharpness. Ray sat in his chair near the front window, eyes fixed on the driveway, coffee growing cold in his hand. Rook lay at his feet, tail still, body alert. Neither of them had slept, not well. Ever since the court order came, every creak of the floor or flicker of light outside carried the weight of threat. Ray had faced danger before, but this was different. This wasn't war, not in the traditional sense. It was something quieter, more calculated, a war of erosion, of will. At 8:46 a.m., the county cruiser rolled in slow, tires pushing gravel aside like a whisper you weren't meant to hear. Another marked vehicle followed. Two officers stepped out, one tall and lean, the other older, face carved from stone. Both wore tranquilizer rifles strapped over their backs. Neither looked proud to be there. Ray moved to the door and opened it before they could knock. "You here for the dog?" They didn't answer right away. The older one cleared his throat, voice steady but lacking conviction. "Raymond Cole, we have a court order to remove the animal listed as Rook on the basis of—" "I've read it." Ray's tone was low, flat. "I know exactly what it says." Behind him, Rook stood, silent and unmoving. His gaze didn't leave the officers. Not a sound came from him. No growl, no bark, just presence. A presence heavy enough to fill the air. The younger officer stepped forward, hand twitching at his hip. Let's not make this difficult. We don't want to hurt the dog. It's a simple removal. You can appeal later through proper channels. Ray stepped aside just enough to show the interior of the house. No weapons, no shouting, just a man and his dog. I want you to try, he said quietly. Go ahead. Put your hands on him. They hesitated. I'm not threatening violence, Ray added, wheeling back a few feet. But you're going to see something today. You're going to see what loyalty looks like when it's got teeth. The officers exchanged a glance, and the younger one moved cautiously toward the dog. Rook didn't move, not until the man reached the edge of the steps. Then he stepped forward once and placed himself directly between Ray and the officers. Still no growl, still no bark, but his message was unmistakable. His entire body became a wall. The man paused. Sir, call him off. Ray didn't answer. The older officer, who had remained behind, muttered under his breath, He's not going. To move, look at him. They tried again, this time with the tranquilizer rifle raised halfway, not aimed, just there. But that was enough. Rook's eyes narrowed. His body lowered a fraction of an inch, muscles tensed like wires, and then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he lay down. Right there on the porch, chin flat on the boards, eyes fixed ahead, still between Ray and the officers. He's refusing. Ray said, What? He's not attacking. He's not barking. He's just refusing. That's a choice. That's not a command. The cameras caught everything. Ray had installed a new one over the door and another on a fence post across the yard. The moment Rook lay down went out in real time. Hundreds were watching, then thousands. The older officer stepped back, his voice quieter now. We'll have to report this as non-compliance. They'll come back. You do that, Ray said. But bring more than 2 next time. As the cruisers pulled away, dust curling behind them, Ray turned to the dog and whispered, You knew what they were doing. Before I even said a word. Rook's ears twitched. He stood, turned around and sat by Ray's side. No ceremony, no show, just presence again. By evening, the clip had gone viral. The dog that refused. News anchors debated it. A congressman tweeted, Support. A retired Marine Corps general called it the most honorable act of resistance I've seen in years. Ray didn't answer interview requests. He didn't give a statement. He just sat with the dog and watched the sun bleed out over the plains, and for the first time since the first letter arrived, he felt something stir beneath the exhaustion. Not anger, not hope, exactly, but momentum. By now, the house had become more than a shelter. It was a watchtower, a fortress, a symbol. Ray sat in his living room with every window covered but not sealed. The edges of the curtains weighted so he could still see out without drawing attention. Rook was always nearby, and more than once, Ray knew exactly what they'd been doing. Measuring, studying, trying to gauge his next move. He filmed it all. The following morning, he started a folder labeled Crowley Files. It contained every letter, every visit, every recorded word. The day after that, a retired Air Force pilot called from Arizona and asked if he could share the video with a veterans organization. By week's end, the view count had crossed 100,000. Ray wasn't just a man in a wheelchair anymore. He was a symbol, and Crowley was about to learn what happened when you tried to bulldoze a soldier's home. It began with silence again, but it was a different kind of silence. One loaded with intent, stretched too tight, ready to snap. Ray knew it well. It was the same silence that hovered just before an ambush, the same hush that fell over the desert before the mortar shells hit. Something had shifted, and it wasn't just the air. The video had caught fire. News blogs picked it up. A few local stations called. A talk show tried to bait him with a live interview, but Ray refused. He wasn't interested in being a spectacle. He wanted eyes on the truth, not the drama. But as the views climbed and more vets rallied to his story, the letters from Crowley's office grew colder, more aggressive. The language changed from polite government language to threats dressed in legal jargon. One letter warned of forced institutional review due to mental instability, a veiled way of calling him unstable. Ray read it once, then set it aside. But the next blow wasn't delivered on paper. It came in the form of rumor. First, a man, claiming to be a county assessor, knocked on the door of Ray's neighbor, saying Ray had been hoarding weapons and was likely dangerous. Then a false report appeared on a local neighborhood app, anonymous of course, suggesting Ray had a history of violence. Someone posted that Rook had attacked a child. No proof, no witnesses, just words thrown like stones into a crowd, hoping someone would pick one up and throw it back. A day later, Ray's mailbox was smashed open, its contents scattered across the dirt. Rook found it first, teeth bared, hackles raised. The scent was fresh. Whoever did it had just left. Then came the court order. Ray sat on the porch when the deputy arrived, his badge sharp in the sunlight, his tone apologetic but firm. "This order was signed yesterday, Ray. Judge Malden says the dog's a threat to public safety, says we're to collect him. Tranquilizers if needed." Ray didn't answer at first. He just stared at the man, jaw tight, muscles clenched around the wheels of his chair. "You know this ain't right," he said finally. The deputy nodded once. "Doesn't matter what I know. I've got a job. You gonna use those darts on a dog that saved my life 2 nights ago? If he doesn't come willingly." Ray exhaled slowly, turned to Rook. The shepherd stood next to him, still, eyes fixed on the officer, ears forward but not aggressive. He didn't move. "I won't let you take him," Ray said. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." Ray looked back up. "You already did. The video went up that night." Ray didn't speak much this time. He just showed the papers. He showed the camera feed from the night someone tried to break into his barn. He showed Rook standing guard. Then he read the court order aloud, line by line. He ended with a simple question. "Does this look like a dangerous dog to you?" The video went viral in under 12 hours. Veterans groups issued statements. Animal rights pages reposted the footage with hashtags. A senator's aide emailed for more details. Within a day, national outlets called the case an outrage, a bureaucratic ambush, and a scandal waiting to explode. But Crowley didn't back down. He doubled down. His office issued a press release painting Ray as mentally compromised, suggesting he was hoarding classified military materials and exhibiting erratic behavior. They listed incidents that never happened, referenced complaints from people Ray had never met. It was a full smear campaign, calculated to strip him of public sympathy and turn him into a problem the system could erase quietly. But they didn't count on the dog. The dog didn't move. The dog didn't leave, and neither did Ray. And as long as the cameras kept rolling, the world would see exactly what it looked like when power tried to crush a man who'd already survived worse. He didn't need to. Rook's snarl said everything. By the time deputies arrived, the man was sobbing on the floor, arms held above his head, Rook still standing over him like a statue carved from fury. The sheriff, a younger man named Breckett, stepped inside and looked at Ray. "You all right?" "Wasn't me you needed to worry about," Ray answered, nodding toward the dog. The deputies hauled the intruder away, still muttering about the teeth and how he thought the house would be empty. Ray gave his statement, said little, left the dog's roll out of the report. But he noticed how the officers kept glancing at Rook, how they stepped a little wider around him than they needed to. That night, Ray tossed a thick blanket over the edge of his bed. Rook took the spot without hesitation. He lay there, eyes half closed, but Ray knew he wasn't sleeping, not fully. Outside, the wind picked up, and Ray, for the first time in years, closed his eyes knowing someone else was listening. The fight hadn't reached full boil yet, but when it did, he wouldn't be facing it alone. The sun bled slow across the Texas sky, low and wide, spreading its heat over everything it touched. Ray sat on the porch with a notebook balanced on his lap, the corner of his pen stained with sweat and ink. Rook lay beside him, ears twitching every so often as a bird cut through the air or a leaf scraped across the yard. They'd fallen into a rhythm, A quiet, wordless routine built on trust and awareness. There was no leash, no collar, no need. Rook didn't leave Ray's side. Not ever. It had been 6 days since the man with the crowbar was dragged off in cuffs, but Ray knew better than to believe that would be the end of it. The county hadn't backed down. Crowley's office didn't so much as flinch. If anything, the pressure increased. Another notice had come in the mail, this one thicker, with phrases like remediation, forced compliance, and administrative removal. Legal speak that didn't sound like justice. It sounded like a slow-moving bulldozer, the kind that crushed lives under the excuse of paperwork. Ray wasn't naive. He'd fought wars in 2 countries under 2 administrations and watched men lie with polished boots and soft smiles. If they wanted his land, they wouldn't stop. But they hadn't counted on him fighting back. He set the notebook on the table beside him and reached for the camcorder. It wasn't new. Hell, it was nearly a decade old, but it worked. The battery blinked low as he powered it on and set it on the tripod, aimed at himself and the house behind him. Rook sat in the frame, silent but present. His statue-like calm only emphasized the message. Ray cleared his throat and pressed record. My name is Raymond Cole. I served 3 tours overseas. I was injured in the line of duty. I came home and made a life here. I poured my savings, my time, and everything I had into this land. This house was bought with blood, not figuratively, literally. And now, a man named Nathan Crowley and the county government think they can take it with a letter. He paused, looked into the lens. I'm not leaving, not because I'm stubborn, not because I want to fight, but because this place is mine. And if they can do it to me, they'll do it to every vet without legs, every widow on a fixed income, every old man without someone to call. So I'm staying. And if that means I go down, I want it on record. He shut the camera off. That night, he uploaded the video to a site he hadn't used since his daughter was alive. The password still worked. He titled it simply, "They're trying to steal my home." By morning, it had 400 views. By the next day, 15,000 veterans began sending emails, one from Ohio, another from Montana. A man in Georgia offered to drive down and help if it came to that. A woman from El Paso said her brother was in the same fight, different state, same crooked tactic. Ray read every word. He set up a second camera, this one pointing out at the road, another facing the barn, a third installed under the eaves of the house. He kept backups on a thumb drive and mailed a copy to Darryl with one note, insurance, just in case. That week, 2 unmarked county vehicles parked at the edge of the property and sat for almost an hour. The men inside didn't knock, didn't say a word, just watched. Rook stood at the edge of the driveway the entire time, tail low, body rigid. When they finally drove off, thought maybe you were living on a mountain somewhere, still in that same patch of dirt in Concho County. And they're taking my house, Darryl. 30 days. Crowley and his people. A long silence followed, then the soft rustle of papers on the other end. Say no more. I'm gonna make some calls. I'm not asking for help, Ray said quietly. Just thought you ought to know. That's bull. You don't call unless you want something, Ray. But lucky for you, I still owe you for dragging my busted is out of Fallujah. Hang tight. I've got a guy. He trains retired canines, dogs that served, some more disciplined than people. Got one who's been giving the handlers fits, doesn't listen to anybody, won't even let the vet put a hand on him. But he's smart, loyal when he locks on. Ray's brow lifted. I don't need a dog. No, Darryl said. But I think this dog might need you. 2 days later, just after noon, a silver transport van rolled up the gravel drive. The man who stepped out wore a faded army cap and an expression too tired to fake small talk. He didn't shake Ray's hand, just walked to the side of the van and opened the back. A German shepherd emerged, all muscle and silence, not a bark. not a whine. His coat was black and tan, his ears sharp and alert, but his eyes, they told stories. Deep ones, wounds that never healed right. The handler stepped back. He's called Rook, served in Kandahar, 3 deployments, explosives, perimeter security and patrol. Lost his handler last year. Since then won't take orders. They were going to put him down. I said hell no. Rook approached Ray slowly. Not aggressive, just cautious. Ray didn't move. He let the dog come to him, their eyes locked. And then, as if something clicked between them, Rook sat, not on command, on instinct. Ray looked up. I'll take him. The man nodded once and walked back to the van without another word. By sundown, Rook was asleep beside Ray's wheelchair, breathing deep and twitching now and then, like he was chasing something in his dreams. Ray watched the fire die in the pit. Outside, the orange embers glowing against the dark. He hadn't felt protected in years, but tonight, something was different. Maybe it wasn't over yet. Maybe the fight was just beginning. The morning came quiet, but the land felt changed. As the sun crept over the horizon, painting long gold streaks across the dry earth, Ray rolled out to the porch, with Rook walking beside him. Not leashed, not commanded, just there, silent and alert. The air still held a bite from the night before, and the wind moved low and steady, brushing over weeds that had claimed the edges of Ray's property. Rook paused on the porch and scanned the yard like it was a battlefield. Every creak, every rustle of grass caught his attention. When a truck passed far out on the county road, he tensed, his posture rigid. Ray noticed it all. He wasn't sure yet if this dog was broken, or if he was just waiting for something worth protecting again. Ray poured himself coffee, watched the steam rise, and set the cup on the porch rail. "You can relax, you know," he muttered. Rook didn't. That afternoon, the first test came. It started with a noise. Low. Careful. A crunch of gravel that didn't belong to the wind or the house settling. Ray was in the kitchen, slicing leftover roast when he saw it through the window, the shadow of a man moving alongside the barn, not a neighbor, nobody who belonged. He didn't panic, didn't even roll back from the counter. He simply waited. The door creaked slowly. The screen didn't slap like it normally did. Someone was trying to be quiet. Ray turned his chair to face the hall and whispered, "Rook." The dog lifted his head from the rug. No bark, no growl, just a low, controlled movement as he rose, ears pinned forward, body like a spring coiled tight. The stranger moved through the hall, quiet as he could, unaware of what waited on the other side. Rook stepped forward once, then twice. Then all hell broke loose. With a sound like thunder wrapped in teeth, Rook launched, a blur of tan and black. The man never made it 2 feet into the living room. He screamed as Rook pinned him to the hardwood, teeth bared but not biting, just holding, dominating. Ray rolled into the doorway and saw the intruder's face, early 40s, beard patchy, eyes wide and wild. A cheap windbreaker and muddy jeans. No badge, no tools, just a crowbar and a duffel bag. Ray didn't speak. Sunglasses too shiny for a day with no sun. "Mr. Cole?" the man asked, his voice rehearsed. Ray didn't move from the porch. He simply nodded once, hands resting on the wheels of his chair. The county man approached with fake confidence, flipping through pages like the outcome hadn't already been written. "I'm Agent Paul Kendrick. I'm with the Office of Rural Compliance under Commissioner Crowley's directive. I'm here to officially notify you that the county has moved forward with the redevelopment claim on this property." Ray's eyes didn't blink. "You already notified me?" "Well, yes," Kendrick smiled tightly. "But per protocol, we're also required to serve in person and assess cooperation." Ray rolled forward slowly, each push of his wheel deliberate. "You're here to see if I'll leave quietly." Kendrick hesitated. "Sir, we're hoping to avoid escalation. You're a respected veteran. Everyone appreciates your service. Don't." Ray's voice was low and sharp. "Don't wave that flag in my face and pretend it means anything when you're here to take my home." Kendrick stiffened, tried again. "This isn't personal. It's a procedural development order. These Lands have been zoned for renewal to benefit the county. Low-income housing, job opportunities. Bull. Ray pointed down the drive. You think I don't know what this is? They're selling this land to private developers. I've seen the signs 3 towns over. Ridgeview Estates. Real pretty, real corporate. Kendrick's face darkened. You've got 30 days. After that, enforcement will proceed. If you refuse to vacate, law enforcement will be authorized to remove you. That includes physical. Ray cut him off, rolling closer until they were eye to eye. Let me tell you something, son. I've been dragged through sand, stitched up in a tent while mortar rounds dropped 10 yards away, and I've buried friends who didn't come home. You think I'm afraid of you? His eyes held steady, like a stone just pulled from fire. You'll have to carry me out. You hear me? You'll carry me. Kendrick's hand twitched, tapping the clipboard as if it might shield him. I'll file your resistance in the system, but if you make this difficult, Mr. Cole, it won't go well for you. You've got no power here. Ray gave a thin, humorless smile. You keep thinking that? The man retreated. He wasn't used to standing in front of a man who had nothing to lose. He drove off fast, tires spitting gravel. Ray sat there long after the car disappeared. His fingers trembled on the armrest, not from fear, but from something else. Something burning, deep and rising. The same feeling he'd known when enemy fire lit up the night sky, when you knew a line had been crossed and there was no going back. That night, Ray didn't open the metal box again. He didn't need to. He already knew what was coming, and he was staying, no matter what. The air was thick with heat and the scent of creosote. Ray sat on the back deck beneath the lone mesquite tree that still gave a few hours of shade before the sun reclaimed everything. He'd spread the eviction letter across the table beside a chipped coffee mug, its words worn from rereading, but their meaning sharp as ever. He'd made up his mind the moment Kendrick drove away, but now it was time. To act. He wasn't going anywhere, not without a fight, and not on their terms. Inside, the house hummed with silence. No TV, no music, just the creaks of old boards and the low groan of wind against glass. Ray rolled himself to the corner of the living room, where a rusted lockbox sat beneath a shelf of unopened mail. He reached for it, his fingers steady this time. When the lid opened, the past breathed out like dust. Photos, service stripes, commendations yellowed at the corners, and a tattered contact card, Darrell Trent, former sergeant, friend, brother, in all the ways that counted. He hadn't spoken to Darrell in 4 years, not since Darrell moved out west to run a rehabilitation unit for wounded vets in Santa Fe. But if anyone would understand, it was him. Ray stared at the number, then reached for the landline. His cell had died weeks ago, and he didn't see the point of replacing it. It rang 3 times before a familiar voice answered. Yeah, this is Trent. Ray leaned back, letting the voice settle into his ears like a song he didn't realize. He missed. It's me. There was a pause, then a slow whistle. Ray Cole. Damn.